All right, that was great. Joint All Domain Operations and Joint All Domain Command and Control, Part 2 with Scott Vandewater from the Air Force LeMay Center. Let's do it. So, part number one, we talked about the ideas, strategy, overarching, guidance and doctrine, if you will, of that potentially, even if though we're not there. So, where do we go from that once we have that, strategy, guidance, overview, doctrine? Where do we go from there?
Yeah, this is a really hard thing because just as we talked about in the end of the last episode, uh, we need to have something that is not just a good endpoint, but we need to be able to get there from here to there, and the entire time we need to have a force that's able of continuing to fight. And so, in order to do that, we have to kind of chart out a roadmap with these critical junctures where we have various parts and pieces rolling into the um, rolling into the system, whether that's a new organization, a new form of technology, or new ways of going about business. And sometimes those three things have to kind of be in lockstep together in what someone might call a milestone. What that means is that we would be operating kind of more akin to joint task forces as opposed to what we kind of have now, which are these theater domain specific silos. So operating in a joint task force, is somewhat familiar to those that have operated in CENTCOM for some time. Some people have been operating in joint task forces, and with that in mind, it is a little bit familiar. That said, we have not really framed a major combat operation in that way ever. And so, thinking in those new terms would be a fairly significant kind of move on behalf of our organizational structure. That doesn't have to happen right away, but if that's where we want to go, we need to start thinking about the implications of that going forward. Another piece of this is, in order to allow for that type of structure, you're going to need to have people who are developed deliberately, whether that be education or training, in order to leverage all those different domains and think in across those domains. Not only that, they're going to be experts in all those different systems and all those different, tactics and techniques and procedures. And so, having some sort of decision support tools, whether that be artificial intelligence or some other form of intelligence augmentation, those are going to be critical enablers of this type of thing going forward. So, as we look at those types of technologies, these types of organizational changes, the last thing we need to look at, or maybe the first thing we need to look at, is the ideas surrounding this, and how do we think about all of these types of activities, these types of operations. This is when we need to start kind of breaking it down, and some might argue, this is when we kind of take that system of systems approach, not just our systems and our technologies and the way that we're developing our systems, but also let's take a look at the enemy systems and how they operate. um, it's really important that we are not just focused on the way we're going to fight, but also on the way that our enemy's going to fight and the way that their system's going to respond to the new methods or new thought processes that we bring to bear. So there's a lot to do, and making this kind of a coherent system all the way through is a very, very tall task. And I don't pretend to have all the answers here. In fact, I have very few of them, but it's something that needs a lot of attention. And so to realize JADC2, there's going to need to be a lot of development, and that's again not in a silo. Development across the joint force, and a lot of time, energy, money, probably, and resources devoted to ensuring that we have a coherent strategy and a coherent plan to execute on.
Absolutely, and I agree on the actual applications of, intelligence augmentation and AI helping the force, be better across all things. We'll talk a little bit on that later. Before we get there, wanted to see if I could scratch an itch here on. You've seen several, four-star commanders and secretaries of the services come out with like holistic and wide sweeping changes of what they envision their force, like, force design style in the future. Does JATO and JADC2, more of the JATO, actually hint at the obsolescence or the inability of certain capabilities and platforms to deliver effects, at least with the pacing threat of China, potentially of Russia or other, likely or potential adversaries. Just like you would think about, the Marine Corps and tanks and exquisite, fifth or sixth gen fighters or other things. Does it point or at least insinuate, or do early models show that some things we're investing in or have invested in are not as good in JADO?
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think the short answer to your question is yes. Certainly, it does. Getting into the eaches and ors of what we need to divest of, that's something for somebody else to worry about on the programmatic side. Let's look at the electromagnetic spectrum, at, for example, radios and the way we procured radios and that kind of thing. There are so many different types of radios in the Department of Defense. Across the department, we have land-based radios, we have air-based radios, and way back when we said, hey, all these radios should be able to interoperate. They should be able to work together and what have you. We're kind of arriving at another point of inflection with respect to radios and the EMS. Radios can provide more than just voice comms. And voice comms are proving to be a fairly low bandwidth of communication. It takes me a while to talk to you about the location of something. And if I could just pass it via, a digital signal, I can drop you my point on Google Maps and send that to you. What if I could do that, across the entire Joint Force? What if I could do that via a radio? And so, digital communications are an area of growth in the DoD. But radios right now, many of them are incapable, or at least don't perform particularly well when it comes to those types of digital communications, and they're not tailored to be able to operate in that way. What we're seeing in the open market on the commercial side is an increase in software-defined radios. Being able to, change the way that the systems are behaving via software as opposed to via hardware is going to become a more and more relevant type of thing. And we're beginning to see that in our aircraft. But I think we're going to see a proliferation of that across the entire force. To kind of piggyback on that, we're seeing kind of a breakdown in the stovepipes of acquisitions. And so when the acquisitions, kind of in the old system, if I bought a tank, I'm buying a tank, the whole tank. What we're finding out is that, as time goes on, some of the parts and pieces of a tank might actually have application in other spaces. And so if I buy this thing to have some commonality, whether it's a radio or a collection system of some kind or whatever it might be, there might be applicability in another space in the DoD. And so having interoperability, not reinventing the wheel every time we do a new acquisition program, open modular systems permit this type of shared equity, shared and shared interoperability that allows for efficiency and overall for a more modular and ready, resilient, agile force, to use all the buzzwords.
Yeah, exactly. And that is something we're going after, just so that, in your radio example, we can create one or several networks that are interconnected, where that operator that's at the tactical edge is hyper enabled to make decisions and act and provide effects or collect better than anybody that would be on their own. They're connected to that whole system through those radios in a mesh network or whatever. And it's able to change. It could be adaptive, it could be self-healing and things. And that's only capable through that, software defined nature. And you could update it. You can rapidly create new apps and widgets and capabilities and encryption potential things. So that's, I think, definitely an area for investment for sure in the future. And we're starting there. It's just going to be interesting to see how all of it fits together and interoperates with each other. So with that, talking about the ability to control and provide effects and talk, we'll get into C2, and JADC2 was focused on, arguably before JADO, the term, was even born, at least by the Air Force. But what are we doing specifically in our ability, widget wise, but processes, direction, structure, mission command authorities. Is JADC2 looking at that holistically, or is it, anything come to light of how our C2 needs to change to operate across domains, creating these dilemmas?
Yeah, you're hitting on some really tough points, and I wish that your questions weren't so good, because I'm going to give unsatisfactory answers. So the short answer to your question is yes. People are thinking about things like authorities, things like command relationships, and so as we go forward, there's going to need to be some introspection done about what we need. But I'll tell you, it's tough to start with doctrine, because doctrine is supposed to be your proven best practice. And so we've got to do some exercises, some experiments, some test and evaluation. We got to do some work in order to validate that there's not only is it an interesting and good idea, but that it has real relevance on the battlefield, and it enables something that is greater than what we had before.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting too, because with all of this and the increased comms and the increased network and the ability to reach out and touch the tactical edge, we could very easily fall into the trap of commanders needing to do that and micromanaging and centralizing execution, unlearning a lot of the lessons that we've learned for a while. And part of that is artificial intelligence is really good there at helping in the very clean areas where we've done things before, and we know how tightly coupled systems will operate. That is operating in potentially a complicated area, but not a complex area with fog of war, friction, all those things. So it'll be interesting to see that dynamic and lessons learned, like we had in the past couple of wars with centralized and decentralized control and execution. But how do you, skipping over to AI, how do you see AI's role? I'm imagining it's a pretty heavy lifter for both JADO and JADC2.
Yeah, also, an important question to ask ourselves, because our adversaries are looking very closely at exactly that. The impacts of artificial intelligence are going to be significant. I don't think anybody's disputing that at this point. The problem is where we actually apply it is a little bit sticky, because you have a choice to make. You can either apply it to very narrow problems, and it will have some limited utility. It might save you a couple steps here and there. Hey, I'm going to shuffle these papers from person A to person B, and AI is going to take it from here to there for me. That's neat. But it doesn't actually really lighten the load maybe all that much. The flip side is you can kind of make some pretty big assumptions and have it carry a much heavier load. The issue with doing that is if you don't understand those assumptions really well and understand the training data really, really well, and understand all of the things that go into its decision-making really, really well, then it is very likely that it'll lead you down a primrose path to destruction. And obviously the stakes are very high in this case. Understanding how and why and the way that it makes its decisions is very, very important. And until we have a level of transparency, or maybe a level of like voting algorithm, if you have multiple different systems that are all kind of providing their inputs, and they're independent from one another, different training data, different kind of underlying decisions, that can kind of help a commander to understand or trust the systems a little bit better. That said, we've seen it many, many times. Doing kind of deception against AIs is not particularly hard, especially if you understand them and are able to tinker with them some. And so hardening them against enemy deception, and also ensuring that they aren't kind of biting off on the wrong tips or cues is going to be really challenging. So we have a really hard balance to strike, and that is between the on one side we have overly simplistic problems that we can apply them to. On the other side, we have overly complex problems, And threading that needle is going to be a really important challenge. And that's why we have, things like the Joint AI Centers to try to tackle, what types of challenges we want to really apply ourselves against.
No, that is important. Even, the adversary aside, if you don't know the envelope of where your AI will fail or, be successful, and then the transparency, the control, and ultimately the trust from that are absolutely crucial. So completely agree there, man. With that, T&E is huge. And then the ability to field that and then have that work with the humans to augment intelligence and decisions and actions. Does JADO and JADC2 talk about that at all, human machine teaming, or has that been discussed?
Yeah, so it has, and you'll actually, if you read our JADO annex in Doctrine, what you'll see is that there's an appendix that kind of leaves the door open for some discussions about human machine teaming down the road. The important piece, to your point, is not only the T&E test and evaluation, but the T&E training and education. So
Yeah.
On the AI side, it's the test and evaluation. On the human side, it's training and education. And we can't forget that side, because when you talk human machine teaming, you got to do both. Because if a human doesn't trust it, then you might as well have never done it in the first place. But if a human overtrusts it, then we get something like the Iran Air shoot down that happened back, I think, in the 90s. And so, these are really, really significant problems that if we don't get it right, we'll really walk ourselves down a primrose path.
No, that's good. I have never heard the T&E and T&E, so I'm definitely going to steal that wholesale from you. And I liked Paul Shari's discussion of this as well in Army of None. It was good to see all of his work on that. But time's getting short, but wrapping up, where are we going, like, as far as guidance and doctrine? Are there any independent research organizations actually studying the capability-based assessment?
Yeah, I think that's interesting. You look at what Rand put together recently. Rand had a study that came out on exactly this topic. There's been a number of independent research organizations, as well as some of the major defense contractors, that have been looking very closely at this problem, because for obvious reasons, there's a lot of interest around the Department of Defense, as well as the other organizations surrounding. As we go forward, I think we'll begin to gain some traction on and greater common understanding. Otherwise, we'll end up with kind of a splintered idea, which just won't work. One of the important pieces, though, is really the value proposition. And what I mean by that is, what is it that we are actually offering here? Can we quantify how much better is this system that we're proposing versus the kind of legacy industrial system? If we can't show the difference, then there's no point in doing it. It's a lot of disruption. And so what we need to demonstrate is that there's there, and that the tie-ins between domains are really important, and that we need to leverage them appropriately and defend against them appropriately, et cetera. So kind of to circle back to our very first part of this conversation in the previous episode, I think it's important for us to kind of have a common understanding of what it is that we're offering to the Joint Force, and then we need to do a little introspection to see if we are even willing and able, right, to make the leap, and all the way along the road, continue to be ready to fight tonight.
No, that's good, and that's exactly why I kind of nudged it in the independent organization review too, so that we aren't drinking our own Kool-Aid and telling ourselves how good we made our Kool-Aid, potentially. So I think that exactly like you're saying, getting everybody on board and then getting objective analysis of where we are and where we need to be going through wargaming, et cetera, is extremely important. All right, Scotty, do you got anything else you want to share the audience, or?
No, aside from the fact that just as in the previous episode, this does not constitute the official views of the United States Air Force or the LeMay Center or Air Education and Training Command. And I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today. Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, absolutely. It doesn't represent SOCOM either. But if somebody wants to read more on this or contact you, or are you out there that anybody can reach out and try to find out more information?
I'm pretty clean on the social media.
All right, no Twitter to Scotty. Sorry, guys.
Hopefully you guys like that. I learned a lot in these 2 videos on the ideas of JATO and JADC2 and the actual application of them. Scott's great. Enjoyed that conversation. Hopefully you guys did too. Hit the subscribe, hit the like, thumbs up, hit the bell. If you want more content just like this, I'll see you guys. This is Jerry. See you.